They said in actual material, it probably got maybe another hour or less, but questions, and we can go wherever you want with questions for as long as you want, as soon as the thing gets warmed up. Was there anything before I get started on the questions that anybody had left over from the first section before we get into the second part? See, where's the light control for this? But it's probably easier to see just for the front lights. I don't have to give it all. Turn on the front. Just the back. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. So let's start actually talking about the real meat here. We've kind of done the complete setup. What is it we need to attack? Well, as I said, one of the first things you need to do is you need to get control of the land. In the West, this is an extremely important issue. How many people are familiar with the American Lands Council and the whole?
Ken Ivory, we had Ken Ivory come speak.
Oh, you've had Ken here?
Grand Junction. And we have his video on YouTube.
Yeah, it's really interesting. For, like I said, the last 2 years, Ken and I ran into each other in every other state but Utah, in his home state. We kept, I'd run into Montana or Idaho or Colorado, or in fact, the last time when he was here and last summer, when we happened, I didn't even know he rotated into Colorado, and we actually did 2 joint presentations off the cuff in El Paso County. At the same, because we just ran into each other at the Broadmoor, because he was speaking to the state attorney generals and I was working on a separate presentation for the next day for a different group at the Broadmoor. But anyway, so you're pretty well up on.
Well, some of us are.
Okay. The bottom line of the issue that it goes directly to sovereignty. And it's kind of hard to be a free and independent state if you don't have sovereign control of your land. At the time that there's basically 4 different phases to constitutional development in the states. The original 13, the states that followed between the original 13 up to the Civil War, the states that came after the Civil War, which started with Colorado as the Centennial State, and what are known as the Centennial Constitutions, of which Idaho, which came along in 1890, was one of the Centennial State Constitutions. So one of the easy things going back and forth in a lot of the Western states is that there's a lot of similarities between the constitutions of each of those periods. So if you know one, you know several of them. And then you have the last phase was the modern constitutions that occurred after 1900 with Arizona, Hawaii, Oklahoma, Hawaii, and Alaska, which Alaska and Hawaii kind of stand by themselves. They're completely different at the same time, and they're completely modern, quote-unquote, modern constitutions. But the bottom line is that even the state of Hawaii, which came in dead last, in 1959, with their admission as a state, got complete control of their territorial lands, unlike the Western states. And that's really, it's a curious thing how we got to this point. And even more curious, as I've worked on developing the federal lands transfer movement across the states that I worked in, is the response that you get from the opposition groups. Some of it which is based on money, some of it is based on just nothing but pure, sheer, utter ignorance, and I don't know how and what else to describe why. But I found that it always falls into a category of they either get direct benefit from, subsidy of, or some kind of control issue from the federal government is why they support. Like, I couldn't figure out why the outfitters and outdoor recreation guides in Idaho would be against the federal lands transfer.
Can I say one thing? I think that a lot of people are also afraid of the transfer because they don't have any idea where and how the state would pick it up. They don't know what that looks like.
Right. Well, there's a lot of intertwined issues. I mean, goodness, 100 and some years. I mean, for Idaho, 120 years have gone by. 123 years since 1890 have gone by that this issue has been, and it's tied up with, as we were talking about last night at dinner, it's tied up with tribal claims that exist from the Indian tribes, whether or not they were treaty tribes, whether they were non-treaty tribes, whether they didn't fall in either category, which is basically non-treaty but attached to the BIA, to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, without having a treaty. Most treaty tribes are attached to the BIA. Most non-treaty tribes are to not attached. And then there's that in-between category that they got completely screwed in the deal, but they attached themselves to the BIA to try and get something later. And you got all these competing claims out there, and it's kind of difficult. The one that, and I address anybody that takes my card and has access to my blog site, I address the lies and myths of the public land transfer opponents in dealing with all of these claims that they make. One of which is how can we absorb the cost? The first and easiest response is that if you look at a state like Idaho, which if you look at Colorado, you're going to see exactly the same thing. First of all, anybody that would assume the business model of the federal agencies and taking over federal lands is absolutely insane, okay? But if you look at what we did as a study, we did a study of our state lands. Now, in the state of Idaho, there's 34 million. We're 63% owned by the federal government, whereas Colorado, I think, is 51%, 51 or 52%. If you look at the disposition between federal and state lands that were granted, the state of Idaho has control. The feds have 34 million, which is divided up between the Bureau of Land Management, the National Forest Service, and the National Wildlife Service for refuges. Then you have monuments and Park Service is a small percentage. And then the state lands, we have 7 million that was initially granted, but then stopped. That went into the Idaho Department of Lands and is managed for, like it is in Colorado, as school and education, for education funding. Well, if you look at the state forested lands versus the federal lands, because our state lands are managed for both economic and recreational multi-use means, is an average acre of state forest returns 54 times the average acre of federal forest. 54 times. We get $44 per acre off of state lands and economic benefit. We get 80 cents an acre in federal land, for federal lands. Okay? In forest, I mean, all these figures are just, there is no factual basis for any of their claims to continue to hold on to the federal lands for the amount of destruction done. Forest burning, the issue of forest fires, okay? 4 acres of federal land burned for every 1 acre of state land because of the health of the difference in the health of the forests. Okay, 4 to 1.
How's it going to deal with subsurface rights as well?
Well, yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. I'll get to that. Okay, if you look at, any of these factors, if you look at, what happened since the forest management policy changed, and I'm sure the figures, if you dig them up here for Colorado, they'll look exactly the same. When the forest policy changes came in with the spotted owl and logging started to go down, timber production started to go down. In Idaho, at the peak, we were harvesting about 1.4 billion board feet per year during the 60s and 70s. By the 80s by the 90s, that was down to an average of about 100 million board feet. Okay, so it had dropped more than 90%, basically. Dropped 90%. At the same time, and when the University of Idaho professor gave his presentation, this is how much tunnel vision there is on some of these things. He didn't even know, I had to tell him to put his two slides together in his presentation. He had one way at the beginning which showed timber production and how it fell off with regulation of Endangered Species Act with the spotted owl and all that. And then later on, about 20 slides down in his presentation, he had another slide. And that slide showed the increase in the burn rate of the forest. And you know, the two, when you laid them right on top of each other, they corresponded exactly in correlation. About 5 years after timber production started to fall off, the amount of acreage burning in the national forest went way up until it reached and it almost completely exactly replaced the number of board feet burned up versus the number of board feet that were no longer harvested.
That was part of the policy.
Gee, how could that possibly happen?
That was the policy of not stopping wildfire, or stopping wildfire.
Yeah, and so.
Now we let it burn most of the time.
Right, and now, yeah, now it's even worse. We're losing a net 2 point some billion board feet in Idaho a year to wildfire.
Okay.
So it's exceeded what we were harvesting before, because now it's burning into all the other areas. And if you look, and we've even tried to tell all these people, if you just fly over Idaho, and you can tell exactly where state-owned forest versus federally owned forest exist.
You can if you Google Earth Colorado too. It's really funny.
And you know, yet when you present all these facts, I mean, people are so emotionally tied up, they don't, it doesn't matter. You can present these facts over and they just, oh no, there is no way the state can take control of these federal lands. Eventually though, is facts and logic and reason will prevail. And it will prevail the day that they start missing their PILT payments all the time on a regular basis as the federal fiscal process implodes. A lot of these issues we've talked about here today, especially when it comes to state powers and nullification, that nobody's buying into today, they will change as the federal budget process implodes. Definitely. Because that's the only, whether you're talking about constitutional sheriffs, whether you're talking about state powers, all of a sudden, the whole discussion is going to change as the federal fiscal process implodes. Because what is their incentive to listen to the guy that's standing there telling them what to do all the time if he isn't handing them money all the time too? That's going to go away. And so all of these things that you hear people today saying, it will never happen. The day after tomorrow, it will happen in relativistic terms, the day after tomorrow. Through the rest of this decade, as the federal fiscal process continues its explosion and Treasury debt becomes impossible to sell anywhere on the open market except at 10% for a 10-year note, you'll see that this, and as they can't sell the Treasury debt, which means they can't fund the deficits, and as the Federal Reserve keeps telling them we can't keep buying all that debt, we're monetizing too much, we're way over our monetary base. All this stuff is going to come to an end. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. And that's one thing in the book, as a student of Austrian economics, I don't ever make time-based predictions. You just make predictions based on behavior. And as long as these behaviors remain consistent, you know that this is going to be the result, right? They can move it forward or move it back based on their ability to manipulate, like they have. I mean, if you asked me in 2000, I said, yeah, I couldn't see any way that they could keep this whole mess together past 2010. I said, it is gonna blow up and blow up bad before 2010. Well, it did blow up, but it didn't quite complete because of all the stimulus, TARP, QE, everything they threw at the problem to try and delay it, but that's all it represents is delay. And as that stimulus and all that fake money creation works itself through the economy and the system, right? And you'll see now we're starting to get back to the failure point again, right? Gee, why just don't those darn unemployment figures, they just can't get out of the mediocre to category. Why can't, why is GDP staying at 2%? Why is, because they don't understand any of this. They don't get it that we're coming up to the second part of the downturn. That all they did with throwing all those trillions of dollars at it is just delay the inevitable, didn't end or change anything. So that's what will happen with all of these issues, whether it's federal lands transfer. When states realize that they either have to stand on their own 2 feet, in counties, in cities, they either have to stand on their own 2 feet or they're definitely gonna sink out of sight, well, you're gonna get a different response than we get today. And people that told you you were insane, no way, no how, all of a sudden we go, what was that you were talking about again? What do we need to do here? Right? They're going to start looking around for where leaders have already evolved and educated themselves. And, you know, all I've been trying to do since 2009, when I first briefed the legislature on the bad numbers to come, here and in other states, I started annual briefings. And the most I've gotten here in Colorado was about 25 or 30. And of course, you know, they kept, you know, they wanted something. Can you tell us what's going to happen in the next 6 months? I go, no, I'm not. And I said, here's the behaviors, here's the prediction, here's the results based on the behaviors. You change the behaviors, you'll change the result. But I guarantee, and I said, but that's not, that can go this way or that way based on how these behaviors go in time. Oh, but if you can't tell us exactly when, it's no good to us. And I said, I go, this is kind of like preparing yourself for a hurricane. I can't tell you when the hurricane's going to hit, but are you going to tell me there's no reason to prepare? And they don't get it, you know. So virtually, I mean, they've tried things. I mean, you got Senator Lambert, he's tried running digital gold currency bills. He's tried running bill. You know, there's been various attempts to try and get gold and silver back in as honest money. There's, you know, but they're still looked at as, you know, these are wacko bills. Okay, these can't be serious. And you know, but you'll be amazed how fast when the tip over point comes, how fast all of a sudden those are real, live, actual important bills. Because right until they get it. So, and that's what goes to, you know, you got to develop some way of developing a plan to get control of state banking, private exchange, while figuring out how to destroy and get rid of the Federal Reserve. Yeah. And like I said, again, large part, as I say in chapter 20, we're not going to be able to do things proactively. The Federal Reserve is going to have to implode itself, just like the federal government. It's too far gone. It's too far entrenched. And you're not going to. The beach is heading. The whale is heading towards the beach. And they're going to ride that whale right into the beach. Okay, it can't be turned. It's just going to have to beach itself. So what you have to focus on is, again, right here, right now, what we can do in the county, in the city, in the state to gain control. I tried, you know, we actually had a process, you know, we actually had a bill passed. Was anybody active? Everybody remember Senator Charles Duke? Charlie Duke? He's the guy that went up, he was the state senator from Colorado that went up and negotiated with the Montana militia guys, the Montana Freemen. Okay, anyway, he was my district senator, District 9 down in, which was then, that was Lamborn took over, Doug Lamborn, who now is sitting as congressman in the 5th district. But Charlie he had this crazy idea back in the 90s about state sovereignty and states' right. You know, and Colorado actually was in, there's been 3 phases to the state sovereignty movement. We're in the 3rd phase right now. This is the 3rd phase. We've been through this barrel, we've been over this barrel 3 times. We actually had in 94 and 95, we had passed House Joint Resolution 1035. We were part of the revival of the state sovereignty movement in the 30s before it imploded the 2nd time because of Waco and because of Ruby Ridge, Waco and Oklahoma City. When the bomb went off in Oklahoma City, you could almost see the air coming out of the entire state sovereignty movement because now we were all crazy militia, Freeman, you name it, right? But we had actually passed House Joint Resolution 1035 in Congress and passed the resolution here in the House and the Senate, and